Tomb Raider has been a big part of my gaming experience for years. I remember playing the original on an old PC disc, buying a copy of Chronicles for the PlayStation, being the only Tomb Raider game for the PlayStation I ever bought, and absolutely loving the poorly optimized but fully featured PSP port of Tomb Raider Legend. That's why it's so sad that handhelds have been pretty much devoid of proper Tomb Raider games since the PSP. We went from fully featured ports of Legend and Anniversary to Lara Croft Go, and a recent port of the Lara Croft spin-off titles. But that changed a few days ago. The original 3 titles that launched in the 90s have been remastered in a very surprising way. Here is my review of Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered for the Nintendo Switch. With story, these are the first 3 Tomb Raider games. In the original timeline, adventurer Lara Croft is recruited by Jacqueline Natla to find the Scion of Atlantis, and becomes involved in other adventures with a magical Chinese dagger infused with the power of a dragon, and a meteor from long ago that holds the key to evolution. Story-wise, these games are interesting, especially when it comes to the magical relics that Lara comes across, but it's worth noting they have not been changed at all since their initial launch in the 90s. All the crude stereotypes are still here, along with all the old audio from when Shelley Bond and Judith Gibbons voiced Lara. When it comes to gameplay, this is a collection of action-adventure games heavily reliant on intricate platforming and solving puzzles to progress. In each game, you will traverse 3D areas, climb anything and everything, and solve puzzles to open doors to new levels. The first thing we should note is what they added to these remasters. They're essentially one-to-one to the originals, but with a lot of enhancements. The biggest of note is the fact that you can access both remastered and original graphics settings with the plus or start button instantly swapping on the fly in gameplay or in cutscenes, much like what we've seen before in the Halo 1 and 2 anniversary releases on the Xbox. But there's a lot more here. The original tank controls return, but we also have modern controls that lets you ditch them for more fluid movement akin to Tomb Raider Anniversary, as well as swimming letting you fully control with just the 2 analog sticks. The remastered graphics also give you extra bits of UI like health gauges when fighting bosses. You can save your progress anywhere you are, and there's a New Game Plus mode that is essentially a hard mode you unlock when you beat each title. It brings back the save crystals of the PS1 ports of these games, turns all medical kits into ammo, gives you all weapons from the start, and makes pretty much everything in the game hit harder and lethal to Lara. But we should also talk about what they brought back and retained in these remasters. Each game still has its cheat codes intact, like level skip, giving you all weapons and max ammunition, and the very entertaining exploding Lara cheat for Tomb Raiders 2 and 3, letting Lara jump back and explode into a dozen pieces, something that is argued to this day on whether the original developers added it to confuse players, or if it was in response to the alleged nude Lara cheat that was being thrown around the early days of the internet at the time. Now, main progression. This is essentially a one-to-one remaster of Tomb Raiders 1 through 3. Everything is there just as it was before. You can visit Lara's home in all 3 games and trap her poor butler in the freezer, and progressing through levels hasn't changed at all. You're placed in a 3D area and you need to figure out where to go and fight off enemies that occasionally show up to cause a problem. The point of these games is a matter of platforming and puzzle solving. You move blocks to create platforms, collect key items that are hidden by switches, and every room is essentially just a puzzle for you to solve. Granted, a very large puzzle, like the fact that to open a tomb you need to traverse a dinosaur-infested valley, collect gears that are hidden in caves, and then complete a mechanism to remove a waterfall to reveal said tomb. But you're essentially always puzzle solving with some combat thrown in here and there. While modern raiders of tombs may find the lack of constantly fighting off-putting, it was a blessing back in the 90s. While we do have modern controls to accommodate for movement and platforming, the weird auto-lock combat has not changed. The idea is Lara will lock onto enemies she's looking at and you need to fire off shots while carefully running circles around them to keep her locked onto them. This requires very specific movements, and you need to also be able to jump away from incoming attacks, as enemies will often have much better maneuverability. Basically, these games are very clunky. While that is a part of the charm of classic Tomb Raider, it will certainly have some adjustments that are needed. Funny enough, many of these features work better with the sluggish tank controls, as that's how these games were originally designed. I find the target lock coming off much more often with the modern controls, since moving backwards on modern settings will have Lara turn all the way around instead of just jumping backwards. But really, the only thing I don't like about these remasters is the camera. Likely also a product of the age, but several areas can easily have the camera get caught on the environment, hampering your vision and the setup of your jumps. This is especially present above the waterfall in the Lost Valley of Tomb Raider 1, which led to some very frustrating and rather comical camera angles as you look at Lara and where she's going. I've also noticed that this doesn't happen as often when you're using the classic graphics versus modern. Looking at this whole experience, clunk and all, I think this is great. They retain the same feel as the original games, but with a modern coat of paint, some optional new control features, and the ability to use the old graphics settings to play them just as they were back in the 90s if you want to. And that brings us to content and length, and there's a lot here. You paid $25 for this remaster, and each of these games will easily last you 15 to 20 hours a piece, assuming you don't give up and just use the level skip cheat to get to the good parts, but $25 for nearly 60 hours of tomb raiding is a nice deal. Next up is presentation, and almost all of this is fantastic. The classic graphics mode does look a bit more polished than the actual old models, though it does give all those FMV scenes that pixelated and blurry look of the old PlayStation. And the remastered graphics look incredible. All of the textures look pristine and Lara herself looks very unique. It's not quite the look she had in Angel of Darkness or the Legend reboot. She almost looks like the promotional and FMV versions of Lara from the original series, but touched up and made more detailed and smooth. And the fact that you can compare the graphics at the push of a button at any time is a huge plus. The toggle is also useful as there's an unfortunate side effect of the remastered graphics. For some reason, the lighting changes made a lot of parts of these games strangely dark. In 2 and 3 it isn't a huge deal with the flare mechanic, but many areas of Tomb Raider 1 are overly dark, and I found myself swapping to the original graphics not to see the older look, but to light these areas up as a sort of flashlight. And with performance, they did fantastic. When on the old graphics, you get a constant 30 FPS, much like how the Steam Deck can run the original old Steam versions of these games. And the remastered graphics will give you a stable 60 FPS from start to finish. I found it very impressive that all of these games retain 60 FPS on Switch at all times, docked or handheld. And that brings us to battery life. This Tomb Raider collection will give the original and light models a battery range of 3.5 to 4 hours, while the V2 and OLED models get 6 to 7 hours. In conclusion, Aspyr Media has made an outstanding remaster of the first 3 Tomb Raider games on the Switch. Now on the downside, the darker lighting in the remastered graphics is a bit weird, and the game is still clunky considering how these games were originally designed. But if you want a nostalgia trip, this is a great remaster bringing back everything that made these games fun, albeit dated, all the way to the exploding Lara cheat being intact. Reviews to go rates Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered for the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.